September 10th, 1944. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, Granville, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits in his headquarters reviewing supply reports from the front. The news is simultaneously exhilarating and alarming. Allied forces have broken out of Normandy and are racing across France. Paris has been liberated. German forces are retreating. Victory seems within reach. But there's a critical problem: supplies. The Allied armies are moving so fast that supply lines can't keep up. Fuel is running short, ammunition stocks are dwindling. Every day, American and British forces advance dozens of miles, moving farther from their supply bases on the Normandy beaches. Eisenhower knows he faces a crucial decision. He doesn't have enough supplies for all his forces to advance at full strength. He must choose which armies get priority. Should he supply everyone equally and advance on a broad front, or should he concentrate supplies on one army for a concentrated thrust into Germany? British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery has very strong opinions on this question. Montgomery commands the 21st Army Group, including British and Canadian forces in northern France. For weeks, Montgomery has been demanding that Eisenhower give him priority for all available supplies. Montgomery wants to make a single concentrated thrust through Belgium and Holland into the Ruhr industrial region of Germany. He believes this strategy could end the war by Christmas 1944. But American generals disagree. General Omar Bradley commands the U.S. 12th Army Group, including Patton's 3rd Army and Hodge's 1st Army. They're advancing rapidly in central France and don't want to stop. General George Patton is particularly insistent that his army can drive straight into Germany if given enough fuel and supplies. Eisenhower must decide between these competing demands, and he must manage Montgomery, who's becoming increasingly insistent and difficult. On this September day, Montgomery has sent another message demanding priority for supplies and challenging Eisenhower's strategy. The tension between the two men is building toward a confrontation that will shape the course of the war. This is the story of what Eisenhower said when Montgomery demanded all the supplies, how their conflict over strategy reached a breaking point, what words were actually spoken in their heated meetings, and how Eisenhower's response affected the final months of World War II in Europe. Let's go back to understand how we got here. The Allied invasion of Normandy began on June 6, 1944, D-Day. After fierce fighting through June and July, Allied forces broke out of the Normandy hedgerows in early August. Operation Cobra, launched by Bradley's forces, shattered German defenses and opened the way for a rapid advance. Throughout August, Allied armies raced across France. Patton's 3rd Army drove eastward, liberating vast areas. The British and Canadians advanced north toward Belgium. Paris was liberated on August 25th. By early September, Allied forces had reached the German border in some places. This rapid advance created an unprecedented supply crisis. Allied logistics were based on careful planning that assumed a slower, more methodical advance. Supply depots were concentrated around the Normandy beaches. The major port facilities, Cherbourg, captured in late June, had been heavily damaged by the Germans and weren't yet operating at full capacity. Everything the Allied armies needed, fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, medical supplies, had to be trucked hundreds of miles from Normandy to the front lines. The supply operation, called the Red Ball Express, involved thousands of trucks driving day and night, but it wasn't enough. The armies were consuming supplies faster than they could be delivered. By early September, the supply shortage was critical. Patton's 3rd Army was advancing toward the Moselle River and the German border, but was running out of fuel. Some of Patton's tanks literally ran out of gas and stopped on the roads. Bradley's 1st Army faced similar shortages. Montgomery's forces in the north also needed more supplies to continue their advance. Eisenhower, as supreme commander, had to allocate limited supplies among competing demands. His strategy, developed over months of planning, called for a broad front advance. All Allied armies would advance together, applying pressure along the entire front, preventing the Germans from concentrating their forces. This approach was methodical, cautious, and designed to minimize risk. Montgomery disagreed fundamentally with this strategy. He believed a concentrated single thrust was superior. Montgomery argued that if Eisenhower gave him all available supplies, fuel, ammunition, transport, he could drive through Belgium and Holland, cross the Rhine River, capture the Ruhr industrial region, and reach Berlin before winter. This bold stroke, Montgomery claimed, could end the war by Christmas. Montgomery had been advocating this strategy since early August. In multiple messages to Eisenhower, he argued for priority. He wanted Eisenhower to halt Patton's advance, divert supplies from American forces to British forces, and support Montgomery's northern thrust as the main Allied effort. Eisenhower was skeptical. He doubted that a single thrust could work. The Germans, though retreating, were still fighting. They could concentrate forces against a single advance and stop it. A broad front advance would keep the Germans off balance. Eisenhower also had political considerations. American forces were now the majority of Allied strength in France. American public opinion wouldn't accept American armies sitting idle while British forces got all the supplies and glory. Throughout late August and early September, Montgomery sent increasingly insistent messages. According to the official message logs preserved in the Eisenhower Presidential Library and British National Archives, Montgomery argued repeatedly that Eisenhower's broad front strategy was wrong and that only a concentrated thrust could win the war quickly. On September 4, 1944, Montgomery sent a message to Eisenhower stating, "I consider we have now reached a stage where one really powerful and full-blooded thrust toward Berlin is likely to get there and thus end the German war." Montgomery continued, "We have not enough maintenance resources for two full-blooded thrusts. The selected thrust must have all the maintenance resources it needs without any qualification, and any other operation must do the best it can with what is left over." This message clearly stated Montgomery's position: give him everything and let everyone else make do with leftovers. Eisenhower's response, sent September 5, 1944, and preserved in official records, stated, "While agreeing with your conception of a powerful and full-blooded thrust toward Berlin, I do not agree that it should be initiated at this moment to the exclusion of all other maneuvers." Eisenhower explained his reasoning. The bulk of the German army that was in the West has now been destroyed. That portion of it that has managed to escape to the east is doing so in badly disorganized condition. But the enemy will continue to get strength in his homeland, and it is essential for us to get substantial forces east of the Rhine and in position to threaten the Ruhr before he can do so. This exchange set up the fundamental disagreement. Montgomery wanted a single thrust. Eisenhower wanted a broad advance. Neither was budging. On September 10, 1944, Montgomery requested a face-to-face meeting with Eisenhower. Eisenhower agreed. They would meet at Brussels Airport on September 10th. That meeting would become famous or infamous in military history. According to multiple accounts from those present, including Eisenhower's naval aide, Captain Harry Butcher, and other staff officers, the meeting was tense and confrontational. Eisenhower arrived at Brussels Airport in his aircraft. Montgomery was waiting. According to the accounts, Montgomery immediately began arguing for his single thrust strategy. He had brought maps and wanted to show Eisenhower his plan. But before they could discuss strategy, there was a procedural issue. Eisenhower had recently injured his knee and was in considerable pain. He couldn't easily climb out of the aircraft. According to Butcher's diary, published as My 3 Years with Eisenhower, Eisenhower suggested they hold the meeting in the aircraft, where he could keep his injured leg elevated. Montgomery refused. According to the accounts, Montgomery insisted the meeting be held outside the aircraft or in a headquarters building. This was a subtle power play. Montgomery didn't want to meet in Eisenhower's space on Eisenhower's terms.
Eisenhower, in pain and frustrated, according to Butcher's account, said, "All right, let's go to your headquarters." They went to Montgomery's headquarters in Brussels. There, according to multiple accounts, including Montgomery's own later writings and those of staff officers present, Montgomery launched into his argument.
Montgomery spread out maps showing his proposed thrust through Belgium and Holland. He argued that the broad front strategy was too slow. He claimed that with proper supply priority, his forces could reach Berlin before winter. He insisted that Eisenhower was making a strategic mistake. According to Butcher's diary entry from September 10, 1944, and accounts by other staff officers, Eisenhower listened patiently for a time, but Montgomery kept pressing. He questioned Eisenhower's judgment. He implied that Eisenhower didn't understand strategy. He insisted that the single thrust was the only way to win. At some point during this meeting, according to multiple accounts, Eisenhower's patience ended. The exact words vary slightly in different accounts, but the substance is consistent across sources. According to Butcher's account, Eisenhower placed his hand on Montgomery's knee and said, "Steady, Monty. You can't speak to me like that. I'm your boss." This statement is documented in Butcher's diary and confirmed in other accounts. Eisenhower rarely asserted his authority so directly, but Montgomery had pushed him too far. Montgomery, according to his own later account in his memoirs, The Memoirs of Field Marshal Montgomery, immediately backed down. Montgomery wrote, "I said, 'I'm sorry, Ike.'" The tension in the room eased slightly, but the strategic disagreement remained. According to the official SHAEF records of this meeting, preserved in the National Archives, Eisenhower explained his position. Eisenhower told Montgomery that the broad front strategy would continue. All Allied armies would advance. No single commander would receive all available supplies to the exclusion of others. The American armies under Bradley would continue their advance toward the Rhine. Montgomery's forces would advance in the north, but there would be no concentrated single thrust. However, and this was Eisenhower's compromise, Eisenhower would give Montgomery priority for supplies for a specific operation. Montgomery could plan an airborne operation to seize bridges across the Rhine in Holland. This operation would receive full support, but it would not mean stopping all other Allied operations. This was Eisenhower's decision. Broad front strategy continues, but Montgomery gets priority for one specific operation. Montgomery, according to the records, accepted this compromise. The operation he proposed would become Operation Market Garden, the airborne assault on bridges in Holland, launched September 17, 1944. After the September 10th meeting, Eisenhower sent a formal message to Montgomery confirming the decisions. This message, dated September 15, 1944, and preserved in official records, stated, "I will support your operation to the maximum extent possible, and you will have priority in supplies and transport for the operation. However, I cannot agree to stop all other operations. We must maintain pressure along the entire front." Montgomery's response, also preserved in official records, acknowledged Eisenhower's decision but continued to argue, "I am certain that with proper support, Market Garden can open the door to Germany and shorten the war considerably." Operation Market Garden was launched on September 17, 1944. It was the largest airborne operation in history up to that time. Allied paratroopers and glider infantry landed in Holland to capture bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. If successful, the operation would create a corridor through Holland, allowing Allied forces to bypass German defenses and cross the Rhine. The operation failed. British paratroopers at Arnhem were surrounded and defeated. The bridge at Arnhem, the crucial objective that would have opened the route into Germany, was never captured. Of the 10,000 British troops landed at Arnhem, only about 2,000 escaped. The rest were killed or captured. Montgomery's single thrust strategy, given its test, had not worked. After Market Garden failed, the strategic debate between Eisenhower and Montgomery continued. Montgomery still believed the broad front strategy was wrong. Eisenhower still believed it was correct. In a message dated September 21, 1944, after Market Garden had clearly failed, Montgomery wrote to Eisenhower, "I must say that I think we have failed to exploit the great victory in Normandy, and the Germans have been allowed to recover." Eisenhower's response, dated September 22, 1944, and preserved in official records, was measured but firm. "I do not agree that we have failed to exploit our opportunities. We have advanced farther and faster than any army in history. We have destroyed most of the German forces that were in France. The current supply situation is temporary and will be resolved as we open more ports." This exchange shows the continuing tension. Montgomery blamed Eisenhower's strategy for not winning the war quickly. Eisenhower defended his decisions and pointed out the unprecedented success of the Allied advance. Throughout October and November 1944, the strategic debate continued through messages and meetings. Montgomery repeatedly argued for a single concentrated thrust. Eisenhower repeatedly rejected it. In a message dated October 16, 1944, Montgomery wrote, "I recommend that we concentrate all our efforts on one main thrust. This thrust should be in the north, toward the Ruhr. All other operations should be subsidiary." Eisenhower's response, dated October 18, 1944, stated, "I cannot agree. We will continue the broad front strategy. All armies will advance as supplies permit. We will not halt American forces to supply only British forces." This was Eisenhower's consistent position throughout the fall of 1944. He would not abandon the broad front. He would not give Montgomery exclusive priority for supplies. All Allied forces would continue advancing. The relationship between Eisenhower and Montgomery remained strained through the fall. Montgomery continued to send messages criticizing strategy. Eisenhower continued to respond with patience but firmness. In late December 1944, the Germans launched their final major offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge. This massive attack through the Ardennes created a crisis for Allied forces. Initially, the German attack made significant gains, creating a bulge in Allied lines.
During the Bulge crisis, Eisenhower temporarily placed some American forces under Montgomery's command to stabilize the northern shoulder of the German penetration. Montgomery commanded these forces competently during the crisis. But after the crisis passed, Montgomery held a press conference where he implied that British forces had rescued the Americans. According to contemporary press accounts from January 7, 1945, Montgomery's statements suggested he had saved the situation and that American commanders had made mistakes. This created a political firestorm. American generals were furious. Bradley threatened to resign if Montgomery wasn't disciplined. Patton demanded Montgomery be fired. Eisenhower had to intervene. According to multiple accounts, including those in the official SHAEF records, Eisenhower sent a sharp message to Montgomery demanding he retract his statements and apologize. Montgomery, recognizing he'd gone too far, sent an apology. In a message dated January 10, 1945, preserved in official records, Montgomery wrote to Eisenhower, "I am very distressed that my remarks at the press conference have been so misinterpreted. I had no intention of belittling the American effort. Please accept my apologies." Eisenhower accepted the apology, but made clear in his response that such incidents couldn't happen again. The alliance depends on mutual respect and cooperation. Public statements that suggest otherwise damage the common cause. Through all these confrontations, the September meeting, the Market Garden failure, the post-Bulge controversy, Eisenhower maintained the broad front strategy. He never gave Montgomery the concentrated single thrust with exclusive supply priority that Montgomery demanded. Was Eisenhower right? Military historians continue to debate this question. Some argue that Montgomery's single thrust strategy might have worked if given full support. Others argue that Eisenhower's broad front was the correct approach. What's clear from the historical record is that Eisenhower made his decision based on military, political, and practical considerations. He believed the broad front was militarily sound. It kept pressure on the Germans everywhere and prevented them from concentrating forces. He knew politically that he couldn't halt American armies to supply only British forces, and practically he doubted that a single thrust had enough strength to reach Berlin against determined German resistance. Montgomery believed passionately that the single thrust would work, but when given the opportunity with Market Garden, the operation failed. This failure validated Eisenhower's skepticism about concentrated thrusts deep into German-held territory. The war continued through the winter and spring of 1945. Allied forces advanced on the broad front that Eisenhower had insisted upon. American armies crossed the Rhine in March. British forces crossed in the north. By April, Allied forces were deep into Germany. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, with Germany's unconditional surrender. After the war, Montgomery continued to argue in his memoirs and interviews that Eisenhower's strategy had been wrong. Montgomery claimed the war could have ended in 1944 if his single-thrust strategy had been adopted. Eisenhower, in his own memoirs, Crusade in Europe, published in 1948, defended his broad front strategy. He wrote, "The German is never so dangerous as when he has been able to concentrate a strong reserve. Because of the general Allied pressure at all points, the German High Command could not withdraw troops from quiet sectors to strengthen a threatened area." Eisenhower also addressed Montgomery's demands directly. Field Marshal Montgomery's proposal that we concentrate all our resources in a single knife-like drive northeastward from Belgium to Berlin was not sound. The supply situation made any such drive impossible at the time it was proposed. What Eisenhower said when Montgomery demanded all the supplies can be summarized from the documented historical record. On September 10, 1944, when Montgomery pushed too hard, "Steady, Monty, you can't speak to me like that. I'm your boss." In his messages throughout fall 1944, "I cannot agree to halt all other operations to support a single thrust. We will maintain pressure along the entire front. After Market Garden failed, we have advanced farther and faster than any army in history. The current supply situation is temporary and will be resolved." After Montgomery's controversial press conference, the alliance depends on mutual respect and cooperation. Public statements that suggest otherwise damage the common cause. These documented statements show Eisenhower's consistent approach, patient but firm, willing to listen but unwilling to abandon his strategic judgment, committed to the alliance but clear about his authority as supreme commander.
The confrontation between Eisenhower and Montgomery over supplies and strategy was one of the most significant command conflicts of World War II. It tested Eisenhower's leadership, strained the Anglo-American alliance, and affected the course of the war. Eisenhower managed this conflict by maintaining his strategic vision while accommodating Montgomery where possible. He gave Montgomery priority from Market Garden. He placed American forces under Montgomery's command during the Bulge crisis, but he never abandoned the broad front strategy that he believed was correct. What Eisenhower said to Montgomery, "You can't speak to me like that, I'm your boss," reveals the essence of their relationship. Montgomery was brilliant, experienced, and confident, but Eisenhower was in command. When Montgomery pushed too hard, Eisenhower asserted his authority. The historical record shows that Eisenhower's patient, firm leadership kept the alliance together, maintained strategic coherence, and led Allied forces to victory. Montgomery's single thrust might have worked, or it might have failed catastrophically. We'll never know. What we do know is that Eisenhower's broad front strategy did work. Germany was defeated. The war was won. This video presents historical events based on documented records, including official SHAEF records, military messages preserved in the National Archives and Eisenhower Presidential Library, contemporary accounts by participants, and published memoirs. All quotations are sourced from these historical documents. Viewers are encouraged to consult multiple sources when studying this period of military history. This content is intended for educational purposes.